In this segment, we will go over a summary of economics. All right, so reading 13. And as I mentioned before, I am going to essentially read, and where I feel a little explanation is provided, I'll do that. The benefit is that this will help you remember, and also you can use this as an audio. So in between meetings, or if you are traveling to and from work, you just hear this audio and that will help you remember. What are the different types of markets? You can have factor markets. This refers to markets for factors of production. Factors of production are natural resources, mineral wealth, raw materials, human labor, and so on. Firms are the buyers in the factor market. Product markets refers to the markets for consumer goods and services, also referred to as goods markets. Here the firms are the sellers. You can have intermediate markets where one firm's outputs are another firm's inputs. So for example, if a manufacturer sells equipment to another manufacturer, such as a cement manufacturer, then that would be an intermediate market. Then the third type of market is a capital market. This refers to markets where firms can raise money for investment. This is done in two ways. Either in the debt market, where firms borrow money by selling debt instruments, or in equity markets. Here firms sell claims to ownership, and essentially they are selling equity instruments such as stocks. Capital markets also include secondary markets where debt and equity claims are subsequently traded. This overlaps with what you've seen in equity. The demand function and the demand curve. The general form of the demand function is given right here. The quantity demanded for good A is a function of or depends on the price of A. I stands for income, and then price of other products which are related. An example is the quantity demanded for butter. So quantity demanded for butter depends on the price of butter, and you will notice a negative relationship, because if the price of butter goes up, then the quantity demanded for butter will come down. There is a positive relationship with income, a positive relationship with the price of margarine. Margarine is a substitute. So if the price of margarine goes up, then the quantity demanded of butter will go up. And then a negative relationship with bread. Bread is a complement. If the price of bread goes up, then the demand for butter will come down. Demand refers to the ability and willingness of consumers to consume a good or service at a given price over a period of time. Quantity demanded is typically negatively related to an item's own price. There are some exceptions where we have a positive relationship, and we will touch on those exceptions later. An increase in the price of margarine will increase the demand for butter. Therefore, margarine and butter are substitutes. An increase in the price of bread will decrease demand for butter. So bread and butter are complements. Notice that there is a positive relationship between income and demand. This means that butter is a normal good. If you have another product where there is a negative relationship between income and quantity demanded, then we say that the good is an inferior good. This is the demand function. When we say plot the demand curve, we are simply plotting the quantity demanded for a given product such as butter with the price of butter. The quantity is on the x-axis, price is on the y-axis. When you plot the demand curve, the only thing that changes is the price of butter and quantity of butter. Other variables such as income and price of other products has to remain constant. Inverted demand function is where we make price the subject of the formula. So we say price of butter is equal to whatever, where the whatever would be quantity of butter and then the other variables. The supply function and the supply curve. The general form of the supply function for good A is given here. So quantity supplied for good A is a function of or depends on price of A and then various costs. This is an example. The quantity supplied for shoes depends on the price of shoes, and there is a positive relationship, which means that if the price of shoes is high, then suppliers will be willing to supply more. And then there is a negative relationship with wages and price or cost of leather. Supply refers to the amount of a product producers are willing and able to sell at a given price over a period of time when all factors of production are held constant. So in this context, the factors of production are wages and leather. Quantity supplied is typically positively related to price. An increase in the cost of factors of production leads to a decrease in quantity supplied, hence the negative signs. Supply curve, here we simply plot the quantity of shoes supplied versus the price of shoes, where quantity is on the x-axis, price is on the y-axis. We keep the costs constant. Inverted supply function is where price is the subject of the formula. You need to understand the distinction between shifts and movements along the demand and supply curve. When the own price changes, if we are talking about butter, for example, if the price of butter changes, there will be a change in quantity demanded. This is a movement along the curve as long as the other variables, the income and the price of the substitutes and complements, do not change. So this is a movement along the curve. If any other variable changes, income goes up, or the price of the substitute changes, or the price of the complement changes, then the demand curve will shift. And you need to understand how the shift happens. Obviously, if the income goes up, then the demand curve will shift to the right. With price of substitutes, there is a positive relationship. As the price of substitute increases, the demand increases. With complements, there is a negative relationship. As the price of complements increase, demand decreases. What are factors which cause shifts in supply? Number one is costs of factors of production. There is a negative relationship. As the costs increase, the supply curve will decrease. In other words, the supply function will move left. Costs may include raw materials, wages, cost of borrowing funds, and so on. With technology, there is a positive relationship. As technology increases productivity, costs decrease and supply increases. So far, we have talked about supply and demand from the perspective of either an individual consumer or an individual producer. When we talk about a market, then we have to aggregate the consumers and aggregate the suppliers. To do so, we simply add the demand and supply function of individual consumers and producers. Let's say we have a demand function like this. Quantity demanded depends on the price of butter, and then there is some constant. Assuming that there are 1,000 identical consumers in the market, and typically this is what you will see on the exam, where you are told that there are X number of identical consumers, then the quantity demanded is simply 1,000 times the function that has been given. Similar is the case with the supply curve. Market equilibrium, this is where the equilibrium market price is the price for which the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded in the market. This point is defined on the x-axis. This point is defined on the y-axis as the equilibrium price and on the x-axis as the equilibrium quantity. Excess demand is defined as the surplus of quantity demanded over and above available units supplied in the market. Excess supply is defined as the surplus quantity supplied over and above demanded units in the market. Market forces of demand and supply act to restore equilibrium. If market forces act to restore equilibrium, the equilibrium is said to be stable. If market forces do not tend towards restoring equilibrium in cases of excess demand or supply, the equilibrium is said to be unstable. Here is a picture that depicts what we just talked about. This is the equilibrium point, and this is a situation where supply exceeds demand, so there will be downward pressure. Here we have demand exceeding supply, so the pressure will be like this. But this would be an example of stable equilibrium, where if we move away from equilibrium, market forces will push the market back to equilibrium. Auctions as a way to find equilibrium price. You need to know these basic definitions. First, a distinction between a common value auction and a private value auction. A common value auction is one in which the value of the item is the same to all bidders, but may not be known with certainty at the time of the auction. A classic example is a jar of coins. A private value auction is one in which the value of the item is specific to each bidder, for example, unique pieces of art. Next, we come to types of auctions. First is ascending price auction, also called an English auction. The highest bid wins the item and pays the bid amount. Then we have a sealed bid auction. The highest amount offered wins the item and pays the bid amount, but each bid is unaware of any other bidder's bid. Then we have second price sealed bid auctions, also called Vickery. Here the highest bid wins the item but pays the second highest bid amount. Bidders are more likely to bid the highest amount they are willing to pay. Number 4 is descending price Dutch auction. The price is reduced until a bidder is willing to pay the price. The point here is that the auctioneer starts at a very high price and then starts working down until he finds a bidder who is willing to pay that price. So let's say a bidder pays a high price and then there is still quantity left, then the price keeps coming down and additional bidders then buy at lower prices. So there are multiple prices at which the products are sold. The final category is a modified Dutch auction, also just called a Dutch auction, and this is the one that is used most in financial markets. Roughly speaking, the same as the descending price auction we just talked about, but all bidders pay the same price for the final units, i.e. the lowest price. So we try to find the lowest price at which the full market can clear, the entire product can be sold. And here again, bidders are more likely to bid as per the price they are willing to pay. Consumer and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is defined as the excess of the total value to consumers of the units they purchased above the total amount paid. It's essentially value minus expenditure. Some consumers may have been willing to pay more than they actually had to for the consumption of a good or service. The aggregation or the summation of these excesses is referred to as consumer surplus. Demonstrated right here, this is how much consumers are willing to pay, this is how much they actually paid, so this area is the consumer surplus. Producer surplus is defined as the excess of the amount producers receive for the units they sell above their total variable cost of production. This is revenue minus variable cost, and this area here represents producer surplus. The total surplus is the consumer surplus plus producer surplus. And notice that when the market is in equilibrium, the total surplus is maximized. Market interference is when we have obstacles to efficient allocation. Efficient resource allocation occurs at the quantity where marginal benefit, this is the demand curve, equals the marginal cost, the supply curve, for the last unit produced and consumed. This is where the supply and demand curves intersect. At this point, the total surplus is maximized. Underproduction is when production is less than the equilibrium quantity. So if we look at the picture that we just saw, if the production is less than equilibrium, then we have underproduction. Consumers are willing to pay more than the cost to supply. So in this region, consumers are willing to pay more than the cost. In this case, the marginal benefit, which is represented by the demand curve, is greater than the marginal cost, which is represented by the supply curve. Overproduction is where production is more than equilibrium. So if we are at this point, then we have overproduction. Consumers are willing to pay less than the cost to supply. In other words, cost is high, consumers are willing to pay less than that, so clearly that also is inefficient. The marginal benefit is less than the marginal cost. Both over and underproduction are examples of inefficient allocation of resources, the scale of inefficiency is measured by the dead weight loss. If we have underproduction, then this area here is the dead weight loss. If there is more dead weight loss, that means there is more inefficiency. And by definition, dead weight loss is the decrease in total surplus that results from an inefficient level of production. Taxes, tariffs, and other trade restrictions reduce the equilibrium quantity below the quantity that maximizes total surplus. This is overproduction, and this is something you'll also see in the reading on international trade. Subsidies to the production or import of goods or services increases the equilibrium quantity above the quantity that maximizes total surplus. This is overproduction. A price ceiling is a maximum legal price that results in overproduction and excess demand. A price floor is a minimum legal price that results in overproduction and excess supply. If you are listening to this as a recording, then it would be useful to pause the video and just draw the pictures that represent these relationships. Underproduction and overproduction both result in deadweight loss. Demand and supply computations are usually done based on private costs and benefits of those involved in the economic decision-making process. In other words, a firm produces goods, consumers buy goods, so typically demand and supply is based on the cost of the producer and the benefit of the consumer. Sometimes they are external costs. For example, there might be a pollution-related cost, or there might be external benefits which accrue to third parties that are not involved in the economic decision-making process. When external costs of production and external benefits of consumption are not realized by the producers and consumers, then there might be overconsumption, then there might be overproduction or underproduction. Coming now to elasticity. Own price elasticity or demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. So essentially, this is the responsiveness of quantity demanded or changes in quantity demanded to changes in price. And you must learn this relationship, change in quantity over change in price times price over quantity. And more specifically, the change in quantity over change in price is this coefficient which you will see as part of the demand function. We are looking here at the quantity demanded for butter, and the coefficient of the price of butter is essentially the change in Q over change in P. And on your exam, this is a high probability question where you will probably have the equation. So from the equation you get the change in Q over change in P, and you will be given the P and the Q, so just plug and play. Income elasticity or demand has the exact same form. Instead of price, however, we have income, and the change in Q over change in I is essentially the coefficient of the income variable on the demand function. For a normal good, the income elasticity is going to be positive. For an inferior good, the income elasticity is negative. Cross price elasticity or demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price of a related good or service. If the cross price elasticity of demand is positive, then the good is a substitute. If it is negative, then the good is a complement.